Hey, Matthew, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing today, Reed?
Doing pretty well. When I sat back down with my coffee and I was just actually looking at the chat thread, I like the let's talk about DAT. Let's talk about
Let's
you.
talk about you and IT.
It took me
Sorry.
a second to read the entire like, oh, okay, I know what song this is. This is all right. I appreciate that.
Well, that is really good. This to me feels like the best segue into any conversation about culture because having those common touch points, like the song that everybody knows, not everybody likes it, but everybody knows it. Uh, it gets everybody on the same page, and
Hmm.
it's the example of how culture is that set of common things that bring us together, whether it's the behaviors, whether it's the norms, like the food, the music, the whatever it is. Uh, but here I am hijacking your intro. So why don't you kick us off, Reed?
Absolutely. So for people tuning in, thanks for joining today. Matthew, it's now like a nice little completed circle that I've had with my live streams. You were the first person that I had on my channel back in November, way back in the day when I was using the basic tool of OBS, and I've since upgraded to a much, fancier setup with a lot more bells and whistles that
Ooh.
can go into this. But I appreciate you having me back on. I know we've been talking about this for about 6 months and finding time when you have availability and everything. Um, I also think this is going to be a really cool day where we get to go through, as I like to call it, soft skills, the things that involve people and communication, just everything within the culture surrounding data within an organization, and a lot of like also the roadmap and the journey through that. So it's not something that's been touched on a lot, and I'll even speak for myself where I don't talk about it as much because you can't just say this is when you do that. Like there is well, sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that, and you have to
Yeah.
give that consultant answer, which is it depends so much more with those types of things. So I think it leaves a lot more room for interpretation, and also I think it just means you need to know the subject at a lot more detail versus just 1 + 1 = 2. So I
Yeah.
not nearly as many people talk about this, but it is in many ways equally, if not more important than a lot of other subjects as well.
Yeah, everything's important, right? What's important now? What's important to you? That's it's nuanced, it's
Yeah.
complicated. I am not going to fall into the "it depends" trap that Adam and Patrick use on their weekend live streams so much. But when I was a consultant, so in my pre-Microsoft days, I was like a data warehousing and ETL consultant for many years,
Hmm.
and in those days, if I were to say it depends, the next step is then, and it depends on these things, and this is how we
Yeah.
drive to that conclusion. And the period of uncertainty is very finite. And it was basically my job, it was my responsibility to help my clients eliminate the ambiguity, make a choice, understand the risks and the trade offs, and move forward.
Exactly.
And when I think it depends, that's the thing, right? But
Yeah.
from a data culture perspective, which we'll step back and have a solid start in just a minute, I hope. But from a data culture perspective, uh, very often it's always in a state of uncertainty. It's always nuanced. It's not a picture, it's a dance. It's not a thing that you deliver, it's a thing that you do, and you're constantly doing and adjusting based on a cooperative or
Hmm.
potentially uncooperative partner. And then you take that and multiply it by 1,000 times, and that's what you get.
I agree, and I like your discussion of like a dance or a symbiosis between the two. Like there
Yeah.
is it's an ever continuing relationship and back and forth with a lot of that. But just as a a brief history, like you've been at Microsoft for quite a few years. We've certainly had like a history through, I think, meeting the youth of the MVP program and everything. But you also have certainly one of my favorite personalities on Twitter. There's so many of those times where you have the little mini rants on there that are just, like I relate to so much of this, the little annoyances in here and there. Like, I appreciate just coming across that I have a I chortle and just or breathe heavily through my nose. Just I'm like, yep, I totally relate to that. But I think between you, Adam, and a few others, you have I feel like the most almost like solidified and very somewhat like extroverted personality. Not as an extrovert itself, but the personality is extroverted.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a very apparent, clear personality from pretty quickly meeting you and those few others. But you want to give a little, just a short background about yourself for those who are not familiar?
Yep. So I will, and I will actually use this as a segue into why data culture is what I always want to talk about these days, or that's what it
Sure.
always seems to me sometimes. So I used to say that I'd been programming for over 30 years. And when it got up to the 40 years, like I started programming when I was 11, and that was over 40 years ago. So I don't talk about that anymore. But I fell in love with nerd stuff really early. Studied computer science in college, kind of lost my way. But in the mid 90s, I sort of fell into a career centered around training, mentoring, consulting, with the Microsoft data platform as the heart of it. So I was like a Microsoft certified trainer from SQL 6.5, SQL 7, SQL 2000, .NET framework, and it kind of got bigger from there. Trying to be this generalist, I can help you build this solution, like full stack developer, I think is what they call these folks today, but it was like full stack in like the 2003 timeframe. So a lot of .NET, a little bit of Visual Basic, SQL, ASP, that sort of thing. But with SQL Server 2005 and SQL Server Integration Services in particular, I found something that was both really fulfilling to me, like data, the movement and orchestration of data, I find really exciting. And it's like my happy place. It's like when you're with someone that you love and you just feel comfortable and accepted. That's what data prep feels like to me. And at the time, nobody did integration services, and it was really hard. So like in the course of 18 months, I nearly tripled my billable rate because of that specialization on integration services. Like life was really good for a while. I joined Microsoft in 2008, spent 3 years with the learning group, basically using my training background and some of the relationships that I had built there to fix some problems in the courseware back in the day. I then joined the SQL Server Integration Services product team. When the cloud became a thing, went over and worked on some of the early things in Azure SQL, worked on SQL Server Master Data Services and Data Quality Services as well, worked on Power BI V1, like the add-ins for Excel, took a stint over in the Azure Data world on Azure Data Catalog, and then in 2018, so this is a little bit over 3 years ago, I joined the Power BI Customer Advisory Team, the CAT team that I'm on today. And in this role, I work with a lot of the biggest enterprise Power BI customers in the world. I want to emphasize, I am the last person you want solving your Power BI problems. I know a little about a lot, but I'm certainly not an expert. I work with a team of experts. But the thing that I've done on the CAT team that has helped me have a really big impact and make Power BI better is I have helped define and deliver a customer advisory program where the key folks from some of our biggest client organizations, like the biggest customers in the world, we get them into this NDA community. And as they're coming in, we have these structured conversations where we're basically giving them a venue to let us know what are their biggest problems that they need to solve. Like don't tell me about Power BI yet. Like, what are the business problems that you're working on?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you use Power BI and other tools? And then where do you struggle today solving those problems with Power BI as it exists? So, have a couple hundred of these conversations.
Well, I mean,
And
I just like
Yeah.
just a quick comment on that. Like I just like the fact that like let's not even consider the software where, like because
Yeah.
certain things, as we know, roll downhill, and
Yeah.
it's like you got to continually go up the stream to the source to find where the problem is. Because if you address anything midstream, things are still going to roll back down as soon as you clean it up.
Yeah. And if you're always thinking about the tool in your hand instead of the problem, it's like Maslow's hammer. If the only tool you have is a hammer,
Yeah.
every problem starts to look like a nail.
Hmm.
But the thing that I think is really interesting is that even though, when we started this in 2018, Power BI was not as mature and complete an offering as it is today. And there's still lots of things to improve, but we delivered a ton of improvements over the past 3 years. But we kept hearing again and again and again, the thing that is keeping us from moving forward, it's not just features. Like we want these features, but we really need a stronger data culture. We need to establish a center of excellence. I need to get traction inside my organization
Yep.
to do these things, to make the changes so that, for example, the governance team says yes more often, that it's easier to get people access to the data that they need within processes instead of going around processes, because everybody knows if you tell a business person no, they can't access the data, they're going to have that data next week or maybe even later today. They're just going to do it by asking someone who already has access, and then they're going to have a stale, incomplete
Hmm.
copy that you don't know about. So it's like it only makes the problem worse.
Probably dumped
So
in Excel.
yeah, probably in Excel,
Yeah.
maybe in a CSV, and what we've been able to do earlier this year. So this is like an ongoing effort to get all of the pieces in place. But last week, actually, so I'm going to drop a URL into the meeting chat. But last week we released what was the output of a multi-month collaboration. We actually engaged with Melissa Coates. So Melissa is an amazing Microsoft MVP. She's a consultant, so she runs a consultancy called Coates Data Strategies, and she is at least in my mind, the preeminent voice in the community around the data culture and maturity and administration and governance aspect of using Power BI. So we brought in Melissa as our author. I worked with her pretty heavily, so you see my voice represented in the documentation. And we worked with both the Power BI CAT team and members of that customer advisory
Mhm.
program. And I'm going to say hello to Chewy because he was one of our technical reviewers providing feedback on the draft content.
That's
But
awesome.
basically, we've released a 150-page set of content that basically says, not really this is what you need to do, but it's more of the why and what without
Hmm.
getting too heavily into the how. And the topics and the content is designed to address this broad topic that we heard coming up in so many different customer conversations. And our plan for the year ahead is both to expand and extend this, and to make it available like in more channels for for partners, maybe as a Microsoft Learn course or other places, to make sure that the same people that are learning how to use the tools in Power BI, they can also understand some of the bigger picture challenges, and how to get people involved, how to get the right people from their organization involved to make those steps to establish and maintain a healthy data culture.
No, and like I love the roadmap essentially that's broken out. Like you said, it's not and certainly with anything culture related, there's no specific roadmap, but it gives you
Mhm.
an idea of multiple paths you can take.
Yeah.
It's to an extent to go from like a thing that I remember from just growing up. It's like a choose your own adventure type thing where like you're given a certain set of options. Some may take you to, but this at least helps to make sure that you don't end the story early or incorrectly, or even to your scenario of data siloing is the term that I love. Like those are things that certainly uh, need to be avoided. But like having things like a center of excellence and governance and
Yeah.
all that stuff that needs to be set up prevents all of that. It's provides
Yeah.
quality gatekeeping, so to speak.
Yeah. Can I ask you to share my screen so that I can wave my hand at some of the contents of these docs? So I've got the page
Yes.
up in my browser, and this is going to be like the lamest session. If you came here for a demo, your demos today are going to be me waving my hands and talking about documentation. But hopefully, you're going to stick with me, even though I'm not going to build anything today. But the concept of having a roadmap, we actually were pretty deliberate in our choice of the name for the content, because if you think not about a product roadmap but about a literal roadmap, on a roadmap, and for the kids in the audience, roadmaps used to be these things that you would get printed up and you would have them in the glove compartment or glove box of your car, and you would pull them out when you were lost or you needed to figure out how to get somewhere. And the process of using a roadmap pre Google Maps was you figure out where you are, you figure out where you need to go, and then you see what's between you and that destination. That's what this documentation set is designed to enable, where every organization, so every customer, is going to be in a different starting point, and every organization is going to have different goals, like a different definition of success, because there's no one size fits all in any part of this. It always depends on all these complex things. But we talk in this documentation about some of the high level aspects, like the definition and characteristics of a data culture, the importance of an executive sponsor to be the voice and champion for the data culture, and then a whole bunch of the more technical implementation considerations that you need to look at along the way, like who owns what, how are things delivered, what are the audiences, what is formal or informal support and training and mentoring, and all of these things. And at the heart of it, I'm going to come over and click on this maturity levels page inside the documentation set, where we are really clear upfront to emphasize that for any organization, for any of the topics that we're talking about, they will be in a different place on a maturity scale. So you might be really, really mature in one area and very immature in another. And very often, this is a lens that you can look at, either as a leader, because in order to act on a lot of these things, you need to have authority or at least influence. It's harder to push from the bottom up. But if you're a leader, this gives you a lens to set priorities for initial investments for short-term quick wins. If you're not a leader, this can give you an idea for where you can make a change to demonstrate a win, to get the sponsorship that you need from a leader to do the next things. Or it can be the lens for a conversation where you're driving more awareness about the problem and agreement that there is a problem to be solved, and again, to get the sponsorship to make changes. And this documentation set focuses primarily on organizational adoption. So we don't really get into the user or solution in any significant depth. But for the organizational adoption, we've got these 5 different maturity levels that map out both to the Power Platform and Microsoft 365 maturity models and to multiple industry standard models as well. So this is a very standard way to think about these things. And we basically have, these are the different maturity levels in general and what it would look like for your data culture. And I'm just going to choose a random one here. I'm going to click on governance because this is often a contentious topic. But if I scroll down, if I click, because this is a big article, there's an overview of how you might look at the ways that your organization is performing governance-related behaviors and activities today, to see where you are in this maturity level and what are some of the things that you could do. Coming back up to the considerations and key actions section that each document has, that this is these are the things that you can look at to become more mature in this area. Understanding as well, you're never done, you're never there, because the culture is that complete set of behaviors and activities that everybody is doing every day. It's not what you say, it's what you do.
No, exactly. And I think the thing that I actually really like that's pointed out into here is the quick wins. Like that's honestly probably the very first one of the very first conversations that I have when I get brought in, because I'm usually by the time that there's also there's a fledgling uh, small culture being built, and they're usually just getting started in Power BI. But it's almost always like they have these grandiose ideas, and like, all right, we can't come into this and then spend 6 months to build something out. Like, what's a quick win that we can get to help
Yeah.
get buy-in and to get adoption, which then that builds momentum. And then, like you said, if there are issues that need to be addressed, helps provide the fuel to then want people to realize there is a problem, and then instigate those changes to help fix those.
Yeah. Cool, 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 cool. So, I can talk about this forever, perhaps literally, but I assume that there are questions coming in. I don't know your format and protocol for taking questions from the audience, but are there any that we want to get to? We'll actually defer Adam's question on incorporating Manowar, the Kings of Metal and the greatest heavy metal band in the world. We'll defer that question about Manowar until the next stream, because we've already wasted 20 minutes not talking about Manowar, and we just don't have enough time yet.
There's
Time left.
yeah, I have queued up at least a few. I'll start with this one from Donald, which I think is a very clear-cut one around data culture, and then I'll quickly scan the other ones to see if I can pipe any in for the moment. So let's pop this onto the screen. He had a question about whether or not the BI team should be separate from the data warehousing team.
So I'm gonna shrug and then say often yes. So all of these answers are always, it depends. It's going to depend on a lot of different criteria, but from a general perspective, the most successful organizations that I see, they have a team that is focused on the data estate. So this could be data warehousing, it could be the data warehouse and data lake and things that surround it. But basically, there needs to be a team of technical data experts that maintain and deliver the right data in the right place at the right time, at the right shape, with the right, all the other crap that we need to worry about. But they make sure that the data is available for use for BI and other downstream scenarios. And typically BI is the big downstream consumer, but making sure that the data is there and is available so that when either a self-service BI team or a central BI team that's in the center of excellence or in IT, when they need the data, that it is available. That separation of responsibilities is often what makes that make sense or makes it work at scale. But let me also say that data warehousing and BI are increasingly linked, because the prevalence of self-service BI tools like Power BI means that BI asks for a lot more of the data than other downstream workloads might. So if you're in a situation where the data warehousing team is primarily focused, like the significant majority of their time is in delivering data sets and making them available for downstream BI use, it can make sense to have either cross-representation, like a dotted line relationship, we might say in Microsoft, between two teams that work side by side with shared goals, or to have them report to the same leader or possibly be the same team in some situations. But it always depends. Yes, having separate data and BI teams is common for successful large-scale organizations.
And the last thing that you said there is large scale. Like I very often, BI is going to be comprised of a lot more analysts. Your data warehousing, by the time it gets into backend infrastructure, has a lot more DBAs and other stuff. And they share similarities, but there's separate hats and roles in an organization. But SMB, I often see one or just a couple people playing both roles and doing that. But by the time you get to enterprise organizations, for many reasons, like that you've already mentioned, it very often is split. And there's just kind of separate departments for that. Well,
Yeah,
when it comes to those things,
yeah,
but a lot of it really has to do with the ability for the company to have the resources to actually split it versus kind of assigning the one catch-all IT person every single
yep,
job for them, which
yeah.
it's good and bad. I think for most people who work in that, it's good experience to get, but it also can get exhausting to have to play all those different roles for an individual.
Yeah.
It's the jack of
Well,
all trades where people always
yeah.
miss the second half. It's a jack of all
So,
trades and master of none.
so if I circle back to my brief career overview introduction, being that jack of all trades back in the day, and I was going to say the sharing the documentation might not make sense at this point, but
There.
back in the day, I needed to be able to do everything better than anybody else on the team. Like there was a time when I was leading a team of almost 50 developers, like .com boom doing ASP and SQL stuff. And if anybody came to me, I had to have that question. And following that, being an independent consultant, like team of one, going in and engaging in lots of different things, there's something really important to be said about the learning that you get from needing to do all of the things. But from an organizational perspective, when you're trying to start small because that's all that you can
Yeah.
fund or prioritize, the data team, the BI team, the reporting team, the help desk team might all be like Bob. It might be the one person.
Yeah.
Uh, all of my responses are thinking like global enterprise or a large organization. If you don't have thousands of ongoing users in Power BI, you, for the most part, you're not on my calendar.
Well, it's certainly at the cat scale. Like you said, it is Microsoft's largest customers worldwide. So these are
Yeah.
probably the Coca-Colas and Chevrons and companies like that, I'd figure.
I
Not
won't
even a
name
bit.
any names,
Well,
but
yeah,
those
yeah.
names sure sound familiar.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I'll be the one who can drop like big company names out there. I do have a couple of other fun questions. Let's see, one from, I'll just go in chronological. One from Thomas. This one I'll pop on. What about data vault and or anchor modeling and data culture?
So I want to preface this by saying I am not an expert on those
Hmm.
implementation patterns or those patterns for developing a data estate. So if my response seems like I don't know what I'm talking about, it's because I don't know what I'm talking about. But those patterns for data ingestion, data organization, and data availability, making sure that there's a consistent way to bring in new data and fit it into that bigger picture, these are absolutely contributors for success and for maturity, because the data culture depends on, or a successful, healthy data culture is defined by more people in their day-to-day jobs working with the correct, current, appropriate, curated, trusted data and making decisions based on that. Like that's what we mean when we're talking about data culture. And the having a data vault 2.0 pattern or other patterns for getting the data into the right place with the right shape, with the maturity and
Yeah.
stability and manageability, lowering the IT costs. These are all great predictors of that downstream cultural success. So, absolutely important and valuable.
I agree, and I think just to hit off one of the points that you mentioned, there's continuously in both Power BI and other services more and more locations to store your data, and it always like so often comes down to like where is it processed, where is it stored, where is it certified, and then essentially finally pushed out to all the consumers and analysts at that point.
Cool, cool, cool.
All right, let's see. Pop up. Here's another good one. I got a couple left. From Thomas, what about data lake storage and metadata data types? This would not be one of those ones where you're like, yeah, expertise
Yeah,
in this or
yeah.
not, but
So I want to respond to the metadata part in particular. So I think that my
mm,
previous response is going to apply here. It's like, yep, all those technical things, having the team expert that is doing the right things in a consistent, manageable, scalable way, that is key for any data at scale. Whether or not the data culture is healthy, this is a key part of that success. And no, definitely don't apologize, Thomas. I see you saying me again, sorry, in the chat. No, this is all good. I want to say, and this will be a blog post at some point when my schedule stops kicking me around, but metadata accretes, God damn it, beep.
I'll do it after
value.
There you go.
There we go. Value accretes around metadata. And there's, if you think about how an oyster will take a piece of sand and turn it into a pearl, the sand is like metadata, and the pearl mucus, like the oyster mucus that turns into the pearl, are the processes that use the metadata. So from an end-to-end perspective, traditionally, the creation and maintenance of any sort of descriptive metadata or business metadata has been a tax with a low return on investment. So everybody writes their docs, they put the description in. It's a lot of effort and you need to maintain it, but it just doesn't show up where the data shows up. You need separate documentation. You're constantly pointing people at the metadata. It's just not a great story. I think that the real value around metadata is going to start coming out when tools like Azure Purview are more deeply and tightly integrated into the end-to-end data consumption experience, so that if Thomas and his team, who are working on data management and some aspects of data governance, if they have the ability to define the technical, structural, descriptive, and business metadata in this central catalog and business glossary, and then if a user in Power BI desktop, like the author is saying, oh, I'm going to grab this field, they don't just get the field name and the data type, they get the full business description, who is the owner, et cetera, et cetera. And then when it flows down to the report, it just shows up there as well.
Yep.
We need better ways for this really to work. We need better ways to have the cost and ongoing tax of creating and maintaining metadata to yield significant value, to the point where if someone sees a field in a report and it doesn't have the business description next to it, that they're angry and they complain, and then somebody goes to fix it. We just need to get the wheel moving there.
No, I completely agree, and I think that actually even just transitions over to some of the features available, like directly in Power BI, is like the description fields. Like, I cannot preface enough how like important those are to fill out, whether or not it's an applied step in Power Query or a table, column, or measure that is in the model. The adding anything in there where you can get hover over it and, like you said, get the information that explains what's happening, or what the purpose of this is, where the data's come from, some little bits of notes, because we are, especially within the Power BI universe, we're continually getting towards an idea of a hub and spoke scenario, of a golden data set. And when people are pushing, connecting 100 or so reports off of like a master model, they need context and information to help explain and to validate that they're using the right information, the right field, the right data that they're pulling it from. So it's a little effort today, or basically taking notes, goes a long way in the future. It's way back in the day at Power Pivot Pro when I was working there, it's the be kind to your future self. I love that phrase. It's very easy. It's like, well, that's a tomorrow me problem, so I don't have to worry about that, because the today me doesn't want to have to put in the effort. And like, no, tomorrow you will not like today you if you continue to do this. You have to be nice to tomorrow you.
Well, I'm not gonna be, because past Matthew was mean to me. So
right.
Yeah. It's the ongoing struggle.
I got a couple of other good ones. I actually liked, and I think similar to metadata. So I'm actually going to skip the chronological order, but pop this one up from Matthias. But best practice is to foster data literacy. If there's anything else you wanted to kind of, because it goes a bit into metadata as well. So I wasn't sure if there's any other things you wanted to add.
Yeah. So data literacy is a really, really broad, deep topic that goes beyond data, goes beyond BI. A lot of it comes down to critical thinking. It comes down to visual literacy, being able to effectively parse and understand both the intent of data as it's being presented, and to quickly to quickly be able to read and understand what's actually there. So this is like a really, really hard one, and I'm going to focus specifically on the organizational aspect of this, not any of the like the bigger picture, deep stuff. But I would say the most important thing is to have the resources that people need. And as someone in the Center of Excellence or working on data and BI inside inside your organization, working with your team, you're the person who is probably an expert on where people are weak and where they need to be stronger. But put the resources that they need where they're already working to close the gaps that they have that are keeping them from effectively using the visual information that is being presented to them. Yep. This may be an internal stream or other video channel with snippets of, here's how this information is presented, here's how you read this report. So like there are systems and data sources inside of Microsoft that have their own like giant SharePoint sites with how do I use the data type information just for consumers. Probably don't need something quite as heavy as that, but make sure that the information on how do I work with the data that I need to work with is available to them. And then on the creator side, it's great to showcase the art of the possible, where there could be like office hours or lunch and learn sessions or like internal training or whatever the format is, but to show the people that are working with data to understand the truth in the data, to present it so that people can take action. Those people don't know how to do it yet, or they don't know how to do it right yet. So having the training that's focused both on the concepts and the tools, but also on the effective, nuanced implementation of the tools to solve the problem. Yep. It's all about that information. And the other aspect of it is, and I love the fact that you use the verb foster. So fostering implies this ongoing long-term caring relationship. It's not just a matter of saying, here's this stuff, go read it. It's a matter of reaching people where they are to make sure that you understand their challenges and their needs, and that you are doing whatever is in your power to make them successful aligning with those needs.
And I like just your idea or mention of the having those office hours type thing. I have a few clients that do like a monthly call for the people within their BI and analytics brands, where it's just I join on as a consultant for them, but it's just to catch all the questions. If people have something that they learned about a new feature and they want to ask more about it, but you're providing them the art of possible questions where they feel stuck with their data or stuck with a feature that's built in. But it just that open water cooler conversation for an organization really helps people get comfortable with asking questions and just exploring and having fun with it in a degree. There's a question. Go ahead.
So I dropped into chat a link to the Center of Excellence document from the roadmap doc set, where essentially we talk about in this document what we see successful centers of excellence doing. And there's a lot of overlap between the docs, because is this COE, is this training and mentoring and enablement? There's not a clear distinction between them always. But having here I'm clicking on the link on the shared screen that I'm looking at where the stream is. I'm not actually clicking on the link here, so I'm distracted by the wrong monitor. But we in this documentation, Melissa and I highlight the things that successful centers of excellence do, and having more ways for the people that you need to support, the internal communities of practice that you need to support, having more ways for them to get from your center of excellence what they need to become more excellent themselves. I would say to be excellent to each other, but I don't know if we're ready for a Bill and Ted joke this early in the morning. But having office hours, having lunch and learns, having an ongoing, again, the art of the possible. I'm gonna focus on one particular customer. There's a large British customer that I used to use as an excuse to visit London a couple times a year. So there's a customer that I desperately miss seeing in person. That their Power BI implementation started with a bottom-up champion. So this is someone in the business who was just pushing and pushing and pushing, and he was doing amazing things because he knew the business inside and out. But he was also really passionate about the tools and the data and doing the right thing. And he basically became this company's first champion. And one of the things that he did was he established office hours that were run by him. Like, he didn't talk to IT, he didn't talk to the data people. He basically said, I know that there are people that need to know these things. And so he set up meetings. He started showcasing, this is how you do things with Power BI. And once people were interested, it's like, oh, and here's how SharePoint fits in, or maybe Power Apps, or because he was so involved with that community that he was targeting, he was able to understand what it was that they needed, not thinking about technology or product. Like, this is something that very often the type of people that attend live streams on Power BI, we're like data people, we're technologists, we think about the tool. He wasn't one of those people. He was technical, but he was thinking about the problem and the audience. And because of that, he brought in all of the different content. And boy, did he make an impact by having the resources and opportunities for engagement that his community of practice needed. He met them where they were. And that's a success pattern. That's a rock fact.
You know, like, I love that you I had to mute myself, but I've watched that show, and that is a great miniseries, the Rock Fact one, by the way. But
I was wondering if anyone would get the reference.
Oh yeah. Well, now the songs from that show are back in my head, so thank you for that. They're very catchy tunes. For anybody curious, there's a great miniseries, animated one called Over the Garden Wall, that came out 8 years ago. That was a wonderful little dark and very cute high fantasy series. But I digress. A couple of things that I'm just kind of monitoring in the chat, and a couple of questions that I wanted to pop up. Mm-hmm. So this one's it immediately made me think of an interview question that I actually got back in the day. I did not get the job, mm-hmm. but I was flown to Texas like 10 years ago for a technical account manager position. The immediate question my first interviewer had is, why are you here when we could have interviewed you in Redmond? But I think they just didn't realize my location. But there was a question that I got. I'm curious reading this, if you can guess what that interview question might be. How do you handle a scenario where you discovered the data that has been used for years and years is not correct and the data you're producing is? Does that remind you of like any awkward interview question you might get?
I can't remember the last time that I had a technical job interview. It's a good question.
So I'll just mention the question that this makes me think of is, I have an ugly baby. How do you tell me that I have an ugly baby? That's what this reminds me of. It's like, it almost seems like you now have to convey to an extent to the organization that this data is bad.
So it's a hard conversation, right? So mm-hmm. If I do a 1-hour presentation on data culture, I have an easy part and a hard part are the two big sections. The easy part is technology. The hard part is people. And at some point, you need to have the confidence and the opportunity to say, your baby is ugly. And this might come from showing pictures of pretty babies and then showing a picture of your audience's baby and letting them draw their own conclusion. But it really comes down to what is your relationship with the people that you need to inform about the problem. So in an ideal world, you would have a channel and an opportunity to safely say without repercussion, the data that we've been using for years is wrong. This is what we should be using. and this is why, or this is how I know that this is the case. Like here, I'm showing you my work going
Yeah.
from point A to point B. Here are the problems that I found. Here is the detail of the problem, exploring it. You would be able to have that conversation without fear of repercussion. That being a characteristic of a healthy, properly evolved, mature data culture where
Yeah.
people want to work with the right data, and that's more important than covering their behinds. Realistically, you don't work in that place. Like, not a lot of people can work in a situation where you can go in and
Yeah.
say, hey, remember that thing that you got promoted for? Well, boy, are we screwed.
Yeah.
Because often that's the case. In that situation, you typically want to have small scale conversations with other people who are close to the problem and solution domains, because the solution domain, this is the technology, it's the implementation that either is broken today or needs to be better tomorrow. And the problem domain is that business context that the technical implementation needs to solve and address. And 9 times out of 10, it will be someone on the business side, someone who is responsible for the problem domain that doesn't have the emotional or ego attachment to a given implementation or the ETL process that they broke,
Yeah.
because it's always the ETL process. You have the conversations with the other business people. You get mind share to make sure that, yes, this is actually a problem. And then once you've got like 2 or 3, 5 or 6 of those people in the conversation and everybody agrees that it's a problem, you have basically found not just the one escalation path that may be very risky, but you now have multiple ways to navigate upwards through the org chart before you find the person that you need to have the hard conversation with to let them know that there's a problem. And again, it's really hard and you need to do the work, but
Yep.
making sure that there is a problem, that you understand it and its importance, and work from there.
I think very well said on that. Again, there's also even from just a perspective of whether or not you're within the organization or in like my case now, like consulting, there's a lot less ego and other stuff when you're just the person who is consuming the data and there's no skin off my back to report this, but there almost seems to be a sunk cost that goes into but I spent all this time, it can't be broken because I've already put so much time and effort into it.
Yeah. And it's that sunk cost fallacy is part of how our brains are wired. But this is another pet topic of mine, that you need to have a safe place to do your best work. So if you believe, and especially if it's true, but if you believe that telling the truth will get you in trouble, you're in an awful place and you should look to be in a better place. And this is easy to say and it's hard to do, but the successful organizational culture rewards the identification and resolution of problems more than it rewards covering them up and looking good. And again, this is a hard problem to solve, but be aware that your inability to tell the truth, it's not on you, it's on the people that won't listen or would punish you for telling the truth.
Well, and just the last kind of comment on this is, if you're simply just discovering it and you're not the one who built it, should not be accountability placed on you. But if you identify it and then you still don't report on it, now you are actually accountable for something. You've now become part of the problem.
You're complicit.
Yes, exactly. I do have one I just want to point out. Apparently, I love that the cat team, wherever one goes, others go with it. It's fantastic. Patrick and
I had no idea.
Adam. I think Alex is in there. So there's at least three other cat team members hanging out in the chat. But Gina had a really great question that she also rephrased a bit more succinctly from earlier, so I wanted to address hers. But is there merit to including a discussion of where are we in our maturity as a periodic check-in within either IT or business when involving and related to business intelligence?
Yes. Ideally, all of the decision-making stakeholders that are involved in this conversation, they will agree on the maturity model to use and how to evaluate the current state against that maturity model, and will agree to use that as an input into planning, prioritization, staffing, et cetera, et cetera. So absolutely, not only is there merit, but holy crap, that is an absolute best practice. That understanding of where we are today, how can you get to where you need to be if you don't know where you are? It could not be more important. So yes, yes, and yes. It doesn't depend, only yes.
I, I the one thing that I will at least comment on the "it depends" comment is that basically translates to I don't have enough information. If I get enough, then I can give you a clear answer, right? All right, let's.
Oh.
That's how I interpret it when people ask, like, what does that mean? It means you haven't given me enough information yet.
It could also mean I just don't know and I need to Google things before we talk again. I may be projecting.
That's actually, well, coming from it just makes me think of like the teaching. Like that was one of the hardest things for me to learn how to say as an instructor. I felt that I had to always know, and then you stumble across yourself trying to come up with a BS answer, and then like you know what? Sometimes like I don't know, but let me get back to you on that. And it's amazing how much confidence that builds with clients and or people within the organization. When they hear you say that, they trust when you actually say you do know what you're talking about because they know you will say when you don't. Yes. As a little quick tangent to that. Go ahead.
And every time I see somebody show up where the first thing on their LinkedIn profile is expert, that to me is the little red flag. It's like, wow, I thought I was an expert 20 years ago, and now I realize I have no idea what I'm talking about. So anyway, again, projecting.
Chewy had a comment that actually had a lot of people chatting about this in the chat stream, but I liked would you agree on whether or not data is a public data set, so access to all reports is open? It is an asset, but it's not entirely public. And you can certainly.
Yeah, so the short answer is no, data is not a public asset. Data is an asset that should have the greatest reach so that it can deliver the greatest value. But there is always sensitive data. There's data classification, like there's the whole topic of data classification, governance, security, et cetera, for a reason. And the reason is that it's not simple, and that there is rarely any piece of information that should be available to a very large audience that is truly public, that is produced by an organization. And when you think public data, it's all like, you know, census or government or other things that are produced by a public body. Things like publish to web, for example, when you take your Power BI report that goes from your data sources and makes them available to anyone who has the URL. The reason why this is such a risky tool to use is because it's not public. But if we get back to what I think might be the what I think that might be behind the question is that inside an organization, in an ideal world, everyone should be able to discover what data, what reports, what information exists and is available, and then to have the ability to request access to these things that they have discovered, going through the appropriate channels that were set up by the owners of those resources and whatever governance, compliance, security bodies are in place. And the challenge today is that lots of organizations are really, really heavy. They lock everything down. You don't know that something exists, so you end up creating a duplicate version of that thing. And the conversation needs to be not about how do I make it so that nothing bad can ever happen, to making it around how do we optimize for the behaviors that we want and have mitigation plans in place for the things that we don't want, and to understand that there's always going to be a small number of data domains that really do need to be locked down. There's only like 2 people in the organization that should be able to see them. But if those are the exception and the norm is to make things discoverable and accessible whenever possible, that's definitely a good direction to go in.
When I think you just hit it right at the very end, like which is the data is public, but data within data culture should be accessible, and it should be a golden source of truth, usually coming from the center of excellence. Like in a sense, like you should be able to get to it efficiently and easily, and with as little data siloing, going back to that term, as possible.
Yeah.
Looks like you're bringing up something, so I can actually flip back over to that.
Oh, look at that, and I'm going to put excuse me, I'm going to put the link in here as well. So this is actually a blog post that I put together following a live stream that Adam and Patrick were doing on their Guy in a Cube channel. And I assume that no one has heard of this niche channel called Guy in a Cube. Look at it on YouTube. They're okay, I guess. It's not Reed Havens, but it's still worth following. If you're here, you'll probably like their channel too. But basically, there was a conversation about governance and self-service just not going together. I'm like, oh my God, no! These are perfect together. Because governance, if everything is centralized and IT driven, governance is just a matter of putting policies in place. It's much simpler. But when you have more people needing to work with more data in more ways, this is when this is when governance really comes into play. And you mentioned that you liked my Twitter rants. This actually started off as a Twitter rant, building on a military engagement theme, because that's where my brain was that day. But the big takeaway for me is that the more important data and information and being data driven is, the more likely self-service workloads are going to be a key part of your business intelligence and analytics strategy. And the more people will need to be working with more data from more places, this increases the importance of both having flexible, well-defined and well-communicated data governance policies in place, and having an engaged data governance process, so that after that initial level setting, and I'm actually going to jump back from my personal blog post, I'm going to jump back over to the governance article in the Power BI governance roadmap. Sorry, the Power BI adoption roadmap to come to this image, which is so. Melissa has such a beautiful way of communicating visually. Like when I saw this, I immediately fell in love with it. So we work with a lot of customers. So the Power BI CAT team, we work with a lot of customers that they basically threw Power BI at all their users. Like, oh, we got an E5 enterprise license. Everybody go do BI now. And a year or two later, they're like, wow, these people made a big mess. It's time for me to do some planning. And we have other customers that we work with where they have an established central IT team that has been doing data in BI with no self-service or very limited self-service. And they will often do that governance planning up front to make sure that they're like dotting all their I's and crossing all their T's as they move forward. But the pattern that we see being most effective in so many different situations is that there's this back and forth where you come up with the general guideline of, what do we want to have happen and what do we want to not have happen, and then we do it, and then we learn, and then we update, and the doc goes deeper than just the diagram. But this type of flexibility is what is the greatest predictor of success. This is what's going to work most of the time, whereas the first two, these can work, but it's harder work because you're trying to do big chunks, either cleaning up the mess that you made through your hands-off initial approach, or trying to get everything perfect, because by the time that you get that giant governance planning done, anybody who's going to be using a self-service BI tool, they will have picked their own tool and used it their own way before you gave them any rules. And then you're going to have to go pry their tools out of their hands.
I'm assuming the hands are cold and dead, right?
I didn't want to go there. There's political ramifications to using that phrase, and I'm not going to go there. I
Oh,
will.
that's
Wait.
fair. Yeah.
I do want to point out, since we're reaching the end, and I saw a
Yeah.
sword question earlier. Yes, I use the swords. Some of them are blunt, so like think full contact combat sport, like full contact, full speed, modern protective gear, weapons appropriately weighted and balanced to be like what they would fight with back in the day. Some of them are sharp that you don't use with your friends, because then they're not your friends anymore. I also do competitive cutting. So if the sparring with blunt swords is like paintball, so like resisting opponents, it's an actual fight, people can actually get injured. The sharp swords, it's kind of like target shooting, where you can have targets that, if you're not like good edge alignment, good speed, good structure and form and so on, it just doesn't cut through the targets. It's kind of like target shooting, because it's a real weapon against a non-resisting, non-living target. So it's my therapy.
I like that Adam mentioned that one of his best birthdays when he was when he let you cut up stuff in his backyard, followed by a great meal.
We need to do it again. I have to say, just for everybody who joined the call in the amazing Power BI community, it's conversations like this and the ongoing engagement that has kept me as sane as I am during this horrible, horrible pandemic. I desperately miss each and every one of you, and being able to be there in person, like to cook for friends, to have people over, to go cut things with swords in the backyard, or to hang out at the conference. I hope that we get back to I hope that we get back to those days. And Thomas, you are absolutely correct. Swords are very expensive. They still are. The swords are $1,000. The axes are $50. We should get together and use them sometime.
I will say, just as the last thing, like I know at one point Adam got to like spar with you on stage. That's a bucket list item of mine. If at any point we're ever at a conference or anywhere else, and I get to in any way exchange swords with you, that would be like definitely a nice checklist to say, like, I got to do that at a conference before I die.
Yeah. Well, you know that we live like 2 minutes from each other, right? Where you're in Kirkland, right?
Yeah.
So I am like a couple miles north of you. So
okay,
we can cut that off the bucket list.
There you go.
As time permits.
Okay, I'm holding you to this. At some point, this is gonna be a thing, and then I'm gonna put a video of this on Twitter showing it happen.
Sounds like a plan.
Perfect. Let's see. There was a few others left that I'll throw up, and then I think we can probably wrap up here in a couple minutes.
Cool.
No rush on anything. So let's see. That we answered that one for Fernando. I'll pop his up. How do you compensate? Essentially, how do you compensate champions within a retention policy?
So the first thing, compensate to me says money. That's always a hard conversation, because often you don't control the budget. But when you have a champion that goes above and beyond to help the broader efforts in ways that are not their job, very often the thing that you do is you know, as a member of the Center of Excellence, or someone with a voice that people listen to, you call them out, you thank them, you include their boss on the thank, or their leadership chain, to make sure that everybody that needs to be aware that this person went above and beyond and delivered these results. You make as much of that positive noise as you can. And this in and of itself is typically what champions are looking for. A champion does it because they think it's the right thing and they want to do it. Your encouragement and recognition keeps them doing it in that context. But eventually, very often what ends up happening, and I don't have a pattern, so these are not instructions, but very often the champions end up getting recruited by and hired by the Center of Excellence or that BI team, because they've got the skills that and again, I'm getting back to my problem domain and solution domain model. This is very often how I think about things. So the champions are really close to the problem domain, but they're expanding their knowledge of the solution domain. At some point, You want to get them closer to the solution domain so that they can contribute more, like be a more full-time BI person, and at the same time, they are the liaison with the business group that they used to represent as a champion, and ideally they're going to be building up the next champion, like helping a pipeline grow. Because if the junior person on the team sees a more senior person getting recognized and then promoted and having a more interesting career path and trajectory, that younger person is going to see that as a pattern that they can replicate, and that's really, really key.
I completely agree with that, and I want to bring up, I think, to wrap everything up here for this, is the last question from the very beginning that Adam had for you, which I think will be a great way to finish to finish out this, because I'm curious. I want to know, how do you incorporate ManaWar into data culture?
So you do it by finding the words of power and inspiration that are ever present in ManaWar's lyrics. This warrior spirit, fighting the world and never letting the challenges that the world puts in your way to stop you from being that data warrior that you are inside. You believe in yourself. You are your own disciple. And you use this as this constant motivation and reminder that the world has no chance against you, because you are warriors of the world. But in all seriousness, back in the 90s, like growing this team during the .com, keep in mind, I'm in my late 20s, early 30s at this point. ManaWar was this constant thing, because it's always pounding from the boss's office. Like I was the person that today Matthew would swear about. I was that guy always with the loud music playing in the shared space. But it did become part of the culture. Not everybody liked it, but everybody got the references. And whether or not the true heavy metal of ManaWar and their message of empowerment in the face of adversity, whether or not that music works for you, remember that music and other cultural touch points are examples of what bring a culture together. We started off with, I think it was Wham. What was the you talk about DAT? What was the song that I was making fun of? I remember the song.
It was, I couldn't tell you the artist, but I do know the song at least.
And so with that, everybody got it. You might not know the song, you might not like the song, but you recognize the reference.
Yes.
These ambient behaviors, it's not necessarily what you choose to do or plan to do, but it's what you do. This is what defines a culture. And for a successful, healthy, mature data culture, it comes down to the day-to-day behaviors, what is recognized, what is rewarded, what is encouraged, what is prohibited or punished. What do the leaders do when other people aren't watching? What are the behaviors that you're encouraged to do, even if it's an awkward, difficult thing to do? That's really what a data culture is about, putting the data centricity at the heart of more activities. And both the maturity levels and the broader guidance in that Power BI adoption roadmap that was released last week can help get you and your organization on track by helping you understand where you are, helping you articulate where you need to be, and then helping you find the paths to get from your unique starting point to your unique destination.
I think somebody mentioned in there, like
I'm going to drop the mic now.
Yeah, I think that was a very eloquent response to that. But I think you did a great job of even bringing that into data culture and just the importance of it. It was Salts and Peppa, by the way, was apparently the people who sang
not
that,
George Michael and Wham after all. He did some other song. Anyway, yes. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, and I was one. I like the you could just expand it to call it Mana Warrior.
That's actually a song off their 2012 album, The Lord of Steel.
There you go.
Which, by the way, is their worst album. Don't start with that one.
I would hope to some point see a blog article from you on how to, if you don't already have it already, but how to become a data warrior.
You have to fight your own battles. It's, you need to have the will to succeed. You need to, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go there today because we are over time. And my calendar is waiting to jump on me again as soon as I open Outlook again. But I really appreciated the opportunity and the conversation. And it's awesome to see so many familiar faces and awesome questions coming in from the attendees, from the audience as well.
Yeah, we had a peak concurrent viewership of about 45, so a good solid number in there. I'll give you just overall say thanks for taking your time to come on today. That was fantastic.
I don't know if the audio went weird for you as well, but it did go weird for me.
It was it's a speech effect that I had onto there. So
okay.
Yeah, I don't hear it, but it should have done an cheers plus a little bit of essentially an appreciated megaphone. But otherwise, yeah, Matthew, thank you so much for coming on. We will clash swords, it sounds like now at some point, and that will be absolutely fantastic to do. So enjoy the rest of your day. Everybody tuning in, thanks so much for tuning in today. It's always great to have everybody chatting. And I have 18 pages worth of questions that queued up through. So super active chat, which is always what I like to see. And otherwise, I'll see everybody next week. And yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Thanks very much, everybody. Take care.
All right. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships as well. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on social media to help pass on this awesome content and to help the channel grow. So until next time.